My heart raced as we pulled our beat-up old van into the dusty parking lot of a long-abandoned gas station in the middle of nowhere. It was the middle of the night, and our group of friends had been on a road trip, searching for adventure and a taste of the unknown. We had no idea just how unknown things were about to get. The gas station looked like it had been stuck in a time warp for decades, its windows shattered, and its neon lights flickering erratically. But for a group of curious thrill-seekers like us, it seemed like the perfect place for a little urban exploration. We'd been drawn to the eerie beauty of forgotten places, and this gas station was no exception. We stepped out of the van, armed with flashlights and camera phones, ready to document our adventure. The air was still, thick with the scent of gasoline and decay. Broken glass crunched beneath our sneakers as we ventured closer to the main building. As we peered through the shattered windows, the sight that greeted us sent a shiver down my spine. There were figures inside, hunched over in the dim light, their tattered clothes clinging to emaciated frames. The soft murmur of their voices reached our ears, unintelligible whispers that sent a chill through the warm night. We hesitated, unsure of what to do. Were these homeless squatters, or something more sinister? A strange unease washed over our group as we contemplated our next move. In a moment of fear-fueled bravado, one of my friends, Jake, decided to knock on the door. The response was eerie, to say the least. The figures inside stopped their whispered conversation, and the door creaked open. A single, gaunt man with hollow eyes greeted us, his voice scratchy and barely audible. "Can I help you?" We were a bit taken aback, but Jake explained that we were just passing through and had been intrigued by the old gas station. The man nodded slowly, and we noticed that several more people had gathered behind him. They all had that same desperate, hollow look. "Would you like to come inside?" the man asked, his lips curling into a twisted smile. The invitation should have been harmless, but a heavy feeling of dread settled in my stomach. It was clear to us that something was off about the situation. We declined politely and made our way back to the van, but as we turned our backs on the gas station, we could hear the whispers growing louder and more frenzied behind us. As we pulled away from the deserted gas station, the harsh reality of what we might have stumbled upon began to sink in. There was something deeply unsettling about those people and their sinister intentions, hidden beneath their frail appearances. We had escaped a potential nightmare, one that would forever haunt our memories and serve as a chilling reminder that not all deserted places are meant to be explored. Some are better left in the past, where the darkness can't reach out to touch you. I'd been on the road for hours, driving down a long, desolate stretch of highway that seemed to go on forever. The sun was setting, casting a fiery orange glow across the vast landscape. As I cruised along, the monotony of the road weighed heavily on my mind, and I couldn't help but feel the loneliness of the journey. It was then that I saw him, standing on the side of the road, thumb outstretched in the universal hitchhiker's signal. In the fading light, he looked like an ordinary traveler in his mid-30s, with a friendly smile and disheveled brown hair. I decided to pick him up, thinking that some company on the lonely road might help alleviate the boredom. As he hopped into the passenger seat and introduced himself as Michael, we exchanged pleasantries, and for a while, the drive seemed more enjoyable. But as we talked, I noticed something odd. Michael was picking up on the subtle nuances of my speech, my mannerisms, and even the way I shifted gears. It was as though he was intentionally mimicking me, trying to blend in seamlessly. My unease grew, but I dismissed it as my imagination playing tricks on me. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the highway was now bathed in darkness. My unease intensified as Michael's imitation became more obvious. It wasn't just the way I spoke, but the phrases I used, the anecdotes I shared, everything about me seemed to be his template. I decided to test my suspicions. I began to speak in a deliberately exaggerated manner, using a made-up story with false details. Michael mirrored my every word flawlessly. Panic set in, and I realized I was in a terrifying situation. I was alone on a remote highway with a man who was impersonating me, and I had no idea why. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I contemplated what to do next. My instinct screamed at me to stop the car and demand answers, but fear held me back. Michael's eyes, now devoid of any friendliness, seemed to pierce my soul. The next few minutes were a nightmare. My thoughts raced as I considered the possibilities. Who was this man, and what was his motive? I knew I had to act decisively. I feigned a sudden need for gas and pulled into a dimly lit, deserted station, praying that it might offer me some help. As I filled up my tank, Michael stared at me with an unsettling intensity. I quickly calculated my options and decided to make a run for the convenience store, hoping to find someone inside who could call the police. But as I turned to leave, Michael was already out of the car, blocking my path. In a voice that was chillingly calm, he said, "I think it's time for a change in drivers, don't you?" I knew I had to fight for my life. Adrenaline surged through me as I tackled him to the ground, and we rolled on the pavement, our breaths coming in desperate gasps. It was a life and death struggle, and I was determined not to become his victim. Blows were exchanged, and I managed to wrestle a knife away from him. In that frantic moment, I understood that my survival depended on keeping him subdued until help arrived. My mind raced, and fear fueled my actions. The struggle continued, and my hope was that a passing motorist might see our struggle and call the authorities. It felt like an eternity before I finally overpowered him, and I watched as he lay on the ground, defeated. Minutes later, I saw the flashing lights of a police car in the distance. Relief washed over me as the officers took Michael into custody. I never discovered his true motive or what he intended to do, but one thing was clear: he had meant to take more than just the wheel that night. The encounter left me shaken, with the memory of that dark highway forever imprinted in my mind. It was a nightmare brought to life, a reminder of the horrors that can unfold on the open road. It was a long and exhausting drive through desolate roads. My family and I were on a road trip, heading to a remote cabin in the mountains. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a dark, eerie shadow over the landscape, we decided it was time to find a place to spend the night. We hadn't planned this stop, so we had no reservations or familiar places to rely on. We just wanted a clean and quiet motel where we could rest our weary bodies. The motel we stumbled upon seemed to fit the bill. It was a small, nondescript building nestled in the heart of nowhere, with a flickering neon sign that spelled vacancy in bold red letters. It felt like a haven of shelter in the middle of nowhere. We pulled into the empty parking lot and made our way to the front office. The bell above the door tinkled as we entered, and a middle-aged man behind the counter greeted us with a forced smile. We asked for a room, and he handed us the key to number 7. As we entered the room, an unsettling feeling washed over us. The decor was outdated, and a musty odor hung in the air. We could hear a faint, continuous hum, which we attributed to the old air conditioning unit. We tried to make ourselves comfortable, but unease lingered. While my wife and kids settled in, I decided to investigate the room. My curiosity led me to check the air vents, and that's when I noticed something chilling. Hidden away inside one of the vents, I found a small camera lens staring back at me. My heart raced as I quickly checked other vents, and I discovered more cameras, skillfully hidden throughout the room. Panic set in as the realization struck: we were being watched. I immediately informed my family, and they shared my shock and fear. We had unknowingly walked into a trap, and the owner of this motel had been spying on us from the moment we entered. We huddled together in the room, feeling violated and vulnerable. It was clear that the man at the front desk had sinister intentions. We debated calling the police, but we had no idea how they would respond, given the remote location. Our best option was to leave immediately. With trepidation, we gathered our belongings and headed for the door. As we stepped outside, The motel owner gave us a sly grin, as if he knew he had terrorized us. We didn't dare confront him, and the fear of what he might do next hung heavily in the air. Once back in our car, we sped away from that nightmarish motel, leaving the dark secrets hidden within its walls. It was a harrowing encounter that left us shaken and distrustful. We had unknowingly walked into a web of surveillance, and the violation of our privacy haunted us long after that night. As we continued our journey to the remote cabin, we couldn't help but look over our shoulders, wondering if our unwanted observer would resurface. My wife and I were looking forward to some quality time together, driving down the lonely highways and exploring new places. Little did we know that our adventure would take a sinister turn. We had been driving for hours through desolate landscapes, with nothing but the open road and the hum of the engine. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the highway. It was just us and the darkness, or so we thought. As we navigated a particularly isolated stretch of road, I noticed a pair of headlights in the rearview mirror. At first, I didn't pay it much attention, assuming it was just another traveler on the road. However, something about the way the vehicle stayed glued to our tail began to send shivers down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed, but I tried to reassure myself, thinking it might be a coincidence. Still, my wife, Lisa, was growing increasingly anxious, urging me to speed up and put distance between us and the pursuer. I obliged, pressing the accelerator a bit harder. The road stretched out before us, but the vehicle behind continued to tailgate us relentlessly. My heart raced, and a sense of dread hung in the air. Who could be following us on this desolate highway, and why? As I navigated a series of twists and turns, I decided to take an unexpected detour, hoping to lose our pursuer. The dark, winding road led us deeper into the wilderness, but the menacing headlights remained steadfast in our rearview mirror. Lisa dialed 911, her trembling voice conveying our fear to the operator. We described our predicament, the unrelenting driver, and our isolated location. The operator assured us that help was on the way, but we knew it would be a while before they could reach us. Desperation took over as we continued to race through the night, a sinister shadow in our rearview mirror. The vehicle behind us showed no signs of relenting. Lisa and I whispered frantic conversations, trying to decipher our stalker's motivations. Were they trying to rob us, harm us, or something even more sinister? The minutes turned into hours as we found ourselves in a perilous game of cat and mouse. I pushed our car to its limits, taking every twist and turn to test the resolve of our pursuer. But they were relentless, staying close enough to keep us in their sights. As the fear and uncertainty mounted, we finally saw the distant glow of approaching police cars. Relief washed over us as the patrol vehicles pulled alongside us, creating a protective barrier between us and our relentless stalker. The police officers instructed us to pull over while they apprehended the menacing driver. It was a woman, her eyes filled with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. The officers quickly detained her and took her into custody. We later learned that she had no criminal record, and her motivations remained a mystery. It was as if she had targeted us at random, driven by some dark compulsion to pursue us relentlessly. The encounter left a lasting mark on both of us, a harrowing reminder that danger could lurk in the most unexpected places. We continued our road trip, but the open highway would never feel quite the same again. It was one of those spontaneous road trips that you dream about when you're young and full of wanderlust. My friends and I, Ben, Sarah, and Mike, decided to hit the open road for a long weekend, leaving the monotony of our daily lives behind. We had no particular destination in mind, just the thrill of adventure and the freedom of the highway. As we cruised along the winding roads, the vast expanse of the American countryside unfolded before us. It was like a scene from a classic road movie. We laughed, played music and felt like the world was ours. But it was a peculiar roadside sign that piqued our interest and set the stage for the horrors that would follow. The sign was weathered and rickety, proclaiming the existence of the House of Oddities at the next exit. Intrigued by the bizarre, we decided to give it a try. It wasn't long before we reached the exit and followed a twisting road that led us to a place that would forever haunt our memories. The entrance to the House of Oddities was a dilapidated structure, its paint peeling and windows boarded up. A faded sign with faded letters spelled out the admission fee, and we each paid the elderly woman in the ticket booth. Her eyes were clouded by cataracts, and her grin seemed a little too wide, like she knew something we didn't. We entered a dimly lit, winding maze of curiosities, each room more unsettling than the last. Taxidermy animals, antique surgical instruments, and oddities from around the world were displayed in the dim light. It was equal parts fascinating and disturbing, with a sense of unease gnawing at the edges of our excitement. The atmosphere inside grew increasingly eerie, with strange noises and whispers that seemed to echo in the narrow corridors. The walls were adorned with portraits of the house's owner, a man with a twisted smile and eyes that bore into your soul. It was then that we realized something was amiss. As we navigated the labyrinthine passages, we began to lose sight of one another, disappearing around corners only to find ourselves in empty hallways. Panic set in as we tried to regroup, our shouts swallowed by the oppressive silence. In the heart of the maze, we stumbled upon a room that sent shivers down our spines. It was a makeshift operating theater, complete with rusted tools and restraints. The realization that something was horribly wrong struck us like a sledgehammer. And then we found Mike, strapped to a gurney, pale and trembling. The sinister owner, the same man from the portraits, loomed over him. He had a crazed look in his eyes, a mad glint that told us we were in grave danger. He revealed his gruesome intentions to perform a live dissection show, with Mike as the unwilling participant. We couldn't let that happen. With sheer desperation, we attacked the owner, struggling to free our friend. The chaos that ensued was our only chance at survival. The decrepit walls of the House of Oddities seemed to close in around us, like a living entity trying to protect its secrets. A vicious battle unfolded, culminating in Mike's rescue, but the owner escaped into the labyrinthine darkness. We decided not to pursue him, fearing the depths of the evil that resided within those walls. The exit seemed impossibly far away as we stumbled through the twisting corridors, each turn leading to another disturbing sight. Finally, we found ourselves back at the entrance, gasping for breath and soaked in sweat. The elderly woman in the ticket booth was gone, as if she had never existed. The rickety sign had vanished as well. We fled the House of Oddities, our hearts pounding and our minds scarred by the horrors we had witnessed. Our spontaneous road trip had taken an unimaginable turn into a nightmare. It was supposed to be a memorable family road trip, an adventure through picturesque landscapes and the bonding time we'd been craving. My wife, Lisa, our 2 kids, Mia and Jake, and I packed up our SUV and hit the road. The GPS directed us through winding roads and quaint towns as we soaked in the beauty of nature. But the road trip took an unexpected turn when I decided to take a detour through a remote forest. I'd read about a scenic route that promised breathtaking views, and I couldn't resist the idea of discovering a hidden gem. Little did I know that this decision would plunge us into a nightmarish ordeal. As we ventured deeper into the forest, the dense canopy of trees blocked out the sun, casting long shadows across the narrow road. My excitement started to wane, but it was too late to turn back. We were already too far in, and I didn't want to admit to my family that I'd made a mistake. As the road became increasingly overgrown and the GPS signal vanished, a feeling of unease settled over us. We passed dilapidated cabins that seemed long abandoned, and the silence was oppressive. My wife's worried glances spoke volumes, and I tried to reassure her that everything was fine. But our situation worsened when the road abruptly ended in front of a wooden barricade. We were trapped. Panic welled up inside me as I realized I had no idea where we were, and our cell phones had no signal. We were truly lost in the wilderness. My attempts to turn the car around were interrupted by eerie rustling sounds in the trees. That's when I noticed a group of people emerging from the forest. They were ragged, wild-looking, and their eyes held a feral gleam. They didn't appear welcoming. I rolled down my window, trying to maintain a friendly demeanor. They spoke in hushed, guttural voices and pointed to the barricade, making it clear we were not allowed to pass. Fear surged through me as their hostility became apparent. They had no intention of letting us leave. The situation escalated quickly, and they surrounded the car, their intentions clear. They weren't interested in robbing us. They wanted something far more sinister. I locked the doors, but the sound of glass shattering filled the air as a rock smashed through a window. Lisa screamed, and Mia and Jake clung to her in terror. I frantically searched for an escape route, my mind racing for a way out of this nightmare. With no other option, I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, sending the car crashing through the barricade and into the forest. We sped down a rugged, unpaved path, branches scraping the car, but the forest dwellers pursued us relentlessly. They screamed and yelled, their anger fueling their pursuit. Their primitive faces contorted with rage, making my blood run cold. I navigated the treacherous terrain, praying we would find a way out. Our car's headlights pierced the darkness, and my heart pounded as we hurtled deeper into the forest. Finally, we reached the edge of the woods, and I could see the lights of a nearby town. We didn't stop until we reached the safety of a gas station, where we called the police. They assured us they would investigate the situation and warned us against taking such detours in the future. They never mentioned what had provoked the forest dwellers, but I had an inkling it was their territory. The road trip we'd envisioned had turned into a chilling encounter with danger. We escaped, but the terror of that forest and the hostility of its residents would forever haunt our family's memory. From then on, we decided to stick to the main roads and avoid detours that might lead us into the unknown, realizing that true adventure could sometimes come with a price too high to pay. The open road beckoned, and I followed its winding path, discovering hidden gems along the way. One such gem was a charming souvenir shop nestled on the outskirts of a small town. Curiosity led me to park my car and step inside the quaint little store. The shop was filled with all manner of trinkets and memorabilia, from postcards and keychains to handcrafted jewelry. The musty smell of aged wood and dust hung in the air, adding to the shop's charm. An elderly man stood behind the counter, his eyes bright with a mischievous glint. I browsed the shelves, admiring the variety of items on display. Among them were curious mementos, strange and unique in their own right. Some items were clearly handmade, while others bore the marks of wear and tear from years of travelers passing through. The shopkeeper observed me, a knowing smile playing on his lips. As I examined a dusty photo album, he approached and began to recount stories about the souvenirs and their origins. He spoke of visitors who had come from far and wide, sharing their tales with him and leaving behind a piece of their journey. I listened with fascination, captivated by his storytelling. It was then that my eyes fell upon an antique jar sitting on a shelf, its contents concealed by layers of dust. The shopkeeper noticed my interest and, with a theatrical flourish, revealed its grim contents. The jar held teeth, hundreds of them, each meticulously arranged in rows, like macabre pearls. My shock must have been evident, as the shopkeeper chuckled and explained that these were travelers' teeth. He described how tourists would trade their teeth for good luck on their journeys, each one a silent promise of safe return. The teeth had been collected for generations, and the jar was a testament to the superstitions and eccentricities of travelers. But as he continued to speak, the jovial tone in his voice took on a darker edge. He mentioned a local legend that those who didn't offer a tooth before their departure faced grave misfortune. The more teeth they'd given, the better their luck. It was then that I noticed his grin wasn't one of humor, but of something more sinister. An eerie silence settled in the shop, and I became acutely aware of my surroundings. The shelves, once charming, now seemed to close in on me, laden with their gruesome treasures. I could feel the weight of the shopkeeper's gaze, and his fascination with my teeth sent shivers down my spine. Feeling a growing unease, I made an excuse to leave, hastily exiting the shop. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that the shopkeeper had been more collector than storyteller. What had once seemed like a charming encounter now filled me with dread. My journey continued, but the souvenir shop and its macabre collection haunted my thoughts. I couldn't help but wonder about the other travelers who had unwittingly contributed their teeth to this grotesque assortment. The road ahead felt lonelier, the world far more unpredictable, and the charm of the open road had been forever tarnished by the horrifying mementos I'd encountered. It was a chilly autumn afternoon when my friend Jamie and I decided to hit the open road for a spontaneous road trip. We'd always been the adventurous type, seeking the thrill of the unknown. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the deserted highway, we stumbled upon a dilapidated diner in the middle of nowhere. The Milton's Diner sign flickered weakly, the neon lights struggling to hold onto their last bit of life. Despite the diner's grim appearance, we were both famished, and the idea of a hearty meal beckoned us inside. The rusty bell above the door jingled as we entered, and we were greeted by a musty smell and the eerie silence that hangs heavy in such places. A small handful of patrons sat scattered at booths, their faces obscured by the dim lighting. We found an empty booth and sat down, the cracked vinyl squeaking beneath us. A grizzled waitress, her name tag reading Dorothy, shuffled over to take our order. She looked far older than her years, with hollow eyes that seemed to have witnessed a lifetime of sorrow. Her voice was barely more than a whisper as she handed us laminated menus, the plastic peeling at the edges. We placed our orders and tried to engage in casual conversation while waiting for our food. But as our voices filled the air, the other patrons remained silent, their heads bowed low. I couldn't help but notice that they all had the same peculiar feature, a small, crescent-shaped scar on their right hands. Time crawled by, and the food finally arrived, looking less appetizing than we had hoped. My heart raced as I watched the patrons pick at their meals with wooden expressions, their eyes fixed on their plates. As Jamie and I ate our unappetizing meal, Dorothy approached our table, her gaze fixed on us with an unsettling intensity. She leaned in, her lips barely moving as she whispered, "You're not like the others. You're special." I exchanged a nervous glance with Jamie, but before we could react, Dorothy had shuffled away to attend to another patron. We decided it was time to leave, and the patron's eerie silence became increasingly uncomfortable. The bell above the door jingled again as we exited, and the world outside seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. But just as we thought we were free, a man with a crescent-shaped scar on his right hand approached us in the parking lot. "You don't know what you've done," he hissed, his eyes filled with a madness that sent shivers down our spines. We jumped into our car, jammed the key into the ignition, and sped away from that forsaken place. As we drove into the night, our minds were haunted by the strange encounter at Milton's Diner. We couldn't shake the feeling that something far more sinister lurked behind the peeling wallpaper and the cracked vinyl booths. And the chilling words of the scarred man echoed in our ears, a cryptic warning that still sends a shiver down my spine. That night, we drove on through the darkness, but the road trip had lost its appeal. The memories of Milton's Diner, with its peculiar patrons and the cryptic message of the scarred man, would forever linger in the darkest corners of our minds. A few summers ago, some friends and I embarked on a road trip that we thought would be full of adventure, great stories, and unforgettable moments. Our journey took us deep into the heart of the Pacific Northwest, where we stumbled upon a remote campsite that promised tranquility and the blissful embrace of nature. Little did we know, this seemingly idyllic encounter would soon turn into a nightmarish experience that would forever haunt our memories. As we set up camp and prepared to spend a few days surrounded by the lush forest, we couldn't help but admire the beauty of our surroundings. The tall, ancient trees formed a protective canopy overhead, while the gentle murmur of a nearby river provided a soothing soundtrack to our evening. Our sense of contentment was short-lived, however. Just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across our campsite, we became aware of another group of campers who had arrived and set up camp nearby. They were loud, rowdy, and their laughter seemed to carry a sinister undertone that sent shivers down our spines. Determined to enjoy our trip, we tried to brush off their disruptive behavior and focused on our own campfire. We regaled each other with tales and jokes, hoping to drown out the unsettling presence of our new neighbors. But the louder we laughed, the more insistent their heckling became. Then, their leader, a burly man with a menacing glint in his eyes, approached our campsite. He introduced himself in a voice that carried a veiled threat. He warned us that this campsite was their territory, and we needed to pack up and leave immediately. Their intentions were clear. They were prepared to drive us away at any cost. We protested, arguing that the campsite was public land and that we had every right to be there. But the man and his group only responded with sinister smiles and menacing gestures, closing in around us. Fear gnawed at our hearts as we realized that we were dealing with a group that had no intention of playing by the rules. In the darkness, tensions escalated as the situation grew more perilous with every passing moment. Our pleas for reason fell on deaf ears, and it became abundantly clear that these were not ordinary campers. They were hostile, driven by a sinister motive we couldn't comprehend. As the situation escalated, we decided that our only option was to abandon our campsite and retreat into the forest. In the dead of night, we moved silently, keeping our flashlights off to avoid detection. We could hear our hostile neighbors searching for us, their voices echoing through the trees like vengeful spirits. The forest seemed to close in on us, and the darkness was oppressive. Our heartbeats thundered in our chests as we navigated the treacherous terrain, moving further away from the campsite and the nightmare that had unfolded there. We wandered through the night, never looking back, fearing that our hostile pursuers might still be on our trail. Exhaustion and fear left us mentally and physically drained, and the once idyllic camping trip had devolved into a harrowing struggle for survival. I've always been drawn to photography, especially capturing the beauty of landscapes in the remote corners of the world. So, it's no surprise that I found myself embarking on a solo road trip through the vast, desolate expanses of the American Southwest. With my camera and gear in tow, I set off on a journey that would take me through sweeping deserts, ancient canyons, and eerie ghost towns. One sweltering afternoon, I found myself on a lonely stretch of highway, miles away from the nearest signs of civilization. As the sun began its descent, casting long, eerie shadows across the barren landscape, I noticed something peculiar. On the horizon, I saw a dilapidated building, partially hidden by a sea of sand dunes. I couldn't resist the urge to capture the building's haunting aura on film. I parked my car by the side of the road and made my way through the shimmering heat to reach the decaying structure. The moment I stepped inside, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The air was heavy with the stench of decay, and the walls seemed to close in on me. As I ventured deeper into the building, my camera shutter clicked away, capturing the deteriorating remnants of a place long forgotten by time. There were faded paintings on the walls, weathered and cracked, with an eerie resemblance to human faces. It was as if the walls were whispering secrets of the past. But then, I stumbled upon something truly disturbing. In one of the dimly lit rooms, my camera's flash revealed a grotesque tableau. It was a collection of old photographs, pinned haphazardly to the walls. These were not ordinary photographs, but images of people, contorted in fear and anguish. They looked as if they had been subjected to unspeakable horrors. I knew I had to document this chilling discovery. I started taking pictures of the photographs, hoping that they might serve as evidence for the authorities. However, I was so engrossed in capturing the images that I didn't notice the eerie silence that had fallen over the building. My heart pounded in my chest as I suddenly realized that I was now alone. I turned to find myself surrounded by a group of menacing individuals. They emerged from the shadows, their faces obscured by masks that bore grotesque, twisted expressions. Fear surged through me as I realized that I had unwittingly trespassed into their lair, capturing evidence of their unspeakable crimes. The group's leader, a tall and imposing figure, stepped forward and ordered me to surrender my camera. I was paralyzed by terror, unable to move as he approached me, his eyes devoid of any compassion. In the most horrifying moments of my life, I was subdued and overpowered, my camera wrenched from my trembling hands. The group of menacing individuals showed no mercy, and their intentions were clear. I was an unwelcome witness to their dark secrets, and they would stop at nothing to ensure my silence. I was bound and forced into a vehicle, the world outside growing dark as I was driven away from the deserted building. The leader of the group, whose name I never learned, delivered an ominous warning. If I ever breathed a word about what I had seen, they would find me and ensure that I suffered the same fate as the unfortunate souls in the photographs. For what felt like an eternity, I was held captive, my heart heavy with the weight of the horrors I had witnessed. My only thoughts were of escape, of finding a way to bring the truth to light and expose the sinister individuals who had abducted me. Finally, an opportunity presented itself. In a moment of carelessness by my captors, I managed to break free from my restraints and flee into the desert. Every step I took was fueled by the desperate need to survive and reveal the chilling truth hidden within those photographs. As I stumbled through the harsh and unforgiving terrain, I could feel the menacing individuals hot on my trail. It was a race against time, a fight for my life, and the only weapon I had was the disturbing evidence I had captured on my camera. The nightmare continued as I eluded my pursuers, finally making my way to the nearest town, where I could safely report the horrors I had uncovered. The authorities launched an investigation, but the sinister group of individuals proved elusive, vanishing into the shadows from which they had emerged. It had been a perfect father-son road trip. My son, Jack, and I were exploring the vast expanse of the American Midwest, bonding over endless stretches of highway and the promise of adventure around every bend. But our idyllic journey took a nightmarish turn on a desolate road, far from any signs of civilization. The sun was setting, casting an eerie orange glow over the landscape. It was the kind of place where cell phone signals went to die, and the nearest town was miles away. Just as I marveled at the remote beauty of it all, our car sputtered and shuddered before coming to a complete stop. I tried to restart the engine, but it was clear that we were stranded in the middle of nowhere. With no choice but to deal with our predicament, I opened the hood and did my best to diagnose the problem. My mechanical knowledge was limited, but I hoped it was something simple. As I peered into the engine, I noticed headlights approaching in the distance. Relief washed over me as a tow truck pulled up. The driver, a middle-aged man with a friendly smile, introduced himself as Dave. He assured us that he could tow our car to his garage for repairs. We climbed into the cab of the tow truck, leaving our car behind. Dave was talkative and amiable, telling us stories of the many people he had helped in similar situations. I relaxed, feeling grateful for his timely arrival. The sun had set completely, and darkness had fallen upon the deserted highway. As we arrived at Dave's garage, I couldn't help but notice that it was far more isolated than I had anticipated. We were in the middle of nowhere, with no other vehicles or buildings in sight. But I chalked it up to the remote nature of the area. Dave said he'd take a look at our car right away, and I felt relieved. Jack and I settled into the garage's waiting area, which was cluttered with old magazines and worn-out furniture. The atmosphere was unsettling, but I convinced myself that it was simply the unfamiliar surroundings. Time passed slowly as we waited for Dave to finish the repairs. I began to grow anxious, wondering what was taking him so long. Then, I noticed a sudden change in Jack's demeanor. He was fidgety and uneasy, and he whispered to me that he had heard strange noises coming from the back of the garage. My heart pounded in my chest as I decided to investigate. As I crept toward the source of the noises, I saw Dave working diligently under the hood of our car. But my attention was drawn to a locked door at the far end of the garage. It was from there that the eerie sounds emanated. Ignoring the knot of dread in my stomach, I approached the door and tried the handle. To my surprise, it was unlocked. As I pushed it open, I was met with a sight that chilled me to my core. Inside the dimly lit room, I saw a series of cages, each containing people who were bound and gagged. Their eyes conveyed pure terror as they locked onto mine. I couldn't breathe as I realized that we had stumbled into a horrifying nightmare. I rushed back to the waiting area, my thoughts consumed by a single, horrifying realization. Dave had no intention of helping us. He was a predator, and he had lured us into a trap. Panic surged through me as I knew we had to escape this nightmare. Grabbing Jack's hand, we quietly made our way to the exit, praying that Dave remained oblivious to our discovery. I knew that our only chance lay in returning to our car and making a run for it. The darkness that had once seemed peaceful now felt suffocating and menacing. Just as we reached the door, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the garage. Our eyes met with Dave's, and he realized that we had uncovered his sinister secret. With a maniacal grin, he lunged toward us, the intent to silence us forever. Adrenaline surged through me as we sprinted back to our car. The engine roared to life, and we sped away from the nightmarish garage. I couldn't erase the image of those terrified faces from my mind, nor the knowledge of the evil we had narrowly escaped. We drove through the night, not daring to stop until we reached the safety of the nearest town. We reported the horrifying encounter to the authorities, who launched an investigation into Dave's gruesome activities. It turned out that he had been luring travelers into his trap for years, leaving them as prey for his horrifying desires. My brother, Mike, and I were on a cross-country road trip. We'd been on the road for days, driving through miles of picturesque landscapes and small towns. Everything was going smoothly until we found ourselves on a desolate highway that seemed to stretch on forever, surrounded by nothing but barren land and endless asphalt. As we continued down that lonesome road, the sound of thunderous engines roared behind us. Glancing in the rearview mirror, my heart sank as I saw a pack of bikers approaching. It was a menacing gang, their leather jackets adorned with intimidating patches and tattoos marking their arms. Mike and I exchanged nervous glances, hoping they would simply pass us by. But these bikers had something else in mind. They swarmed around our car, blocking our path and forcing us to pull over. I could feel the tension rising, and it was clear that we were in a dangerous predicament. A burly, bearded man, who appeared to be the gang's leader, approached our car. He had a sinister grin on his face as he tapped on the window, signaling for me to roll it down. Reluctantly, I did so, and the stench of cigarette smoke and leather wafted into the car. The leader asked what we were doing on their turf, his tone filled with menace. I explained that we were just passing through, on a road trip to see the country. But our pleas seemed to fall on deaf ears. The gang was looking for trouble, and we were their chosen victims. As the bikers circled our car, the situation escalated. One of them, a woman with a wild look in her eyes, began slashing at our tires with a knife. Panic coursed through my veins as our car sagged to the side, crippled by the damage. The gang's leader leaned in closer, his foul breath hitting me like a punch. He threatened us, demanding money and valuables. Mike and I quickly handed over our wallets, hoping it would appease them, but it wasn't enough. They wanted more. The leader's hand shot through the window, grabbing me by the collar, and his eyes bore into mine with chilling intensity. He ordered us out of the car. Fear gripped us as we stepped onto the unforgiving asphalt, surrounded by the gang. The barren landscape that had once seemed empty was now filled with danger. As the confrontation escalated, Mike and I knew we had to tread carefully. The gang's numbers and the ominous atmosphere were overwhelming. They began searching our car, taking our bags and rifling through our possessions. It felt as though we had been thrust into a violent nightmare. We had to make a choice, a risky one. Mike and I decided to distract the gang by pretending to cooperate while discreetly planning our escape. We knew that any wrong move could have dire consequences. While the gang was focused on the contents of our car, we seized our opportunity. With a swift, desperate dash, we sprinted away from the scene, the sounds of angry shouts and revving engines behind us. We ran as if our lives depended on it, which, in that moment, they truly did. Adrenaline pumped through our veins as we zigzagged through the barren landscape, not daring to look back. Our desperate escape led us to a deserted gas station up ahead. We quickly entered the rundown building, hoping it would provide some refuge. The gas station had clearly seen better days, its shelves barren and windows cracked. It was eerie, but at least it was empty. We hid behind a shelving unit, peering through the dusty windows as the gang's menacing motorcycles roared past. Our hearts raced as we realized we had narrowly evaded them. Hours passed as we waited in the abandoned gas station, every creak and rustle in the distance sending shivers down our spines. We had no cell service and no way to contact the authorities. Our car was lost, and all we could do was hope the gang had moved on. As night fell, we realized we couldn't stay in that forsaken place any longer. With caution, we ventured back outside and found a small, dusty trail that led away from the highway. It was our only option. We followed it for miles, hoping it would take us to a nearby town where we could find help. The trail seemed endless, and the isolation was suffocating. We trudged through the darkness, Mike and I casting fearful glances over our shoulders, always expecting to see the menacing bikers in pursuit. But, miraculously, we remained undisturbed, and the trail eventually led us to a small town. As we stumbled into the welcoming lights of the town, a sense of relief washed over us. We found a local sheriff and recounted our harrowing encounter. The law enforcement assured us they would investigate, and Mike and I were provided with a safe place to stay for the night. The terrifying encounter with the menacing biker gang would forever haunt us, a stark reminder of the dangers that can lurk on the open road. The road trip that had begun as an adventure had taken a nightmarish turn, but our escape had been a triumph of wits and desperation. My family and I embarked on our long-awaited road trip. We were eager for adventure, the promise of new experiences, and the excitement of exploring places unknown. The kids were buzzing with enthusiasm as we left our suburban life behind, but little did we know that our journey would soon take a terrifying turn. We were cruising down a quiet highway, surrounded by lush landscapes and the occasional quaint town. The road stretched ahead, inviting us to embrace the freedom of the open road. My wife, Sarah, and I chatted about the upcoming destinations while the kids, Tim and Emily, were in the back, their faces buried in their devices. But our tranquil road trip took an abrupt turn as we encountered an aggressive driver who seemed hell-bent on causing trouble. He tailgated us relentlessly, honking his horn and making obscene gestures. I could feel my frustration building, but I maintained my composure, trying to de-escalate the situation by changing lanes and slowing down to let the reckless driver pass. However, this only seemed to enrage him further. He pulled alongside us, shouting obscenities, his face twisted with anger. It was an alarming sight, one that we desperately wanted to escape. I kept my focus on the road, hoping to put distance between us and the enraged driver. But as we continued, things escalated. The hostile driver sped ahead, blocking our path, forcing us to a stop on the desolate highway. Panic coursed through me, and Sarah's grip on my arm tightened. The kids, sensing the tension, stopped their chatter and watched with wide eyes. The aggressive driver, a menacing figure in a worn-out pickup truck, stepped out, his face contorted with rage. He approached our car, and his voice grew louder, accusing us of nearly causing an accident. It was clear that he was looking for a confrontation, and I knew we were in a precarious situation. I tried to reason with him, apologize for any unintentional mistakes on the road, but he wasn't interested in hearing our side. His aggression was escalating, and his words became a blur of threats and fury. The realization that this situation was spiraling out of control left us in a state of panic. It was no longer a mere road rage incident, it was a life and death situation that was rapidly unfolding. My family's safety was my utmost concern, and I knew we had to escape this man's clutches. With the adrenaline coursing through me, I hit the gas, attempting to swerve around the hostile driver's vehicle and escape. But he was relentless, matching our every move, determined to keep us in his sinister game of cat and mouse. We sped down the highway, desperate for help. Sarah called 911, and we were directed to the nearest police station, but we still had a long way to go before we could reach it. The kids, realizing the gravity of the situation, sat in the back seat, trembling with fear. The situation on the road was getting worse by the minute. The aggressive driver was tailgating us, attempting to force us off the road. It was a nerve-wracking race against time as we weaved through traffic, desperately trying to avoid a deadly confrontation. The police station loomed in the distance, a beacon of hope in our harrowing ordeal. As we pulled into the parking lot, I could see the hostile driver's pickup truck receding in the rearview mirror. Relief washed over us as we approached the station, and the police quickly responded to our distress call. We provided the authorities with a detailed account of the terrifying encounter, including the hostile driver's aggressive behavior and threatening actions. They assured us that they would investigate the incident thoroughly. The nightmare that had unfolded on the road was over, but the ordeal had left us shaken. We couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability, the stark reminder that danger could lurk in even the most unexpected places. Our road trip, meant to be an exciting adventure, had turned into a traumatic experience. The highway, once a symbol of freedom, had become a battleground. It was a stark reminder that even the simplest of altercations could escalate into a life-threatening situation. As we continued our journey, we couldn't help but glance nervously in our rearview mirror, forever haunted by the chilling encounter on the open road. We had learned that safety could never be taken for granted, even in the most picturesque of settings. It was a sweltering summer afternoon when I found myself cruising along an isolated stretch of highway, the sun's relentless rays beating down on my car's windshield. I had been driving for hours, my eyes heavy with fatigue, and my only company was the monotonous hum of the engine. As I approached a desolate intersection, I noticed two figures by the side of the road, their thumbs extended in the universal gesture of hitchhikers. Curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to pull over. The couple appeared friendly enough, their smiles warm and inviting. The man introduced himself as Jack, while the woman went by Emma. They told me they were heading to a nearby town and asked if I could give them a lift. It seemed like a small act of kindness, and I agreed, figuring some company on the long, lonesome road wouldn't hurt. The hitchhikers settled into the back seat, and our journey continued. We made polite small talk, and they shared stories of their travels and adventures. However, as the miles rolled on, their demeanor began to shift. Emma's laughter, which had been warm and genuine, turned into something more sinister, a chilling, unsettling sound that sent shivers down my spine. As we approached the town they had mentioned, Emma directed me to turn down a dirt road that seemed to lead into the wilderness. I hesitated but eventually complied, believing that perhaps there was a shortcut I wasn't aware of. The path grew narrower, and the forest seemed to close in around us, creating an eerie sense of isolation. My anxiety was growing, and I questioned their intentions, but they assured me this was the right way. It was then that Jack, who had been silent for some time, turned to me with a malevolent glint in his eyes. He said something that sent chills down my spine, revealing their true, sinister nature. They spoke of a destination, a place far removed from civilization, a place where they believed their dark rituals and sacrifices would bring them power and transcendence. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like a nightmare unfolding in real life. Panic gripped me as I realized I was caught in a horrifying situation. I glanced around, looking for any opportunity to escape. The dense forest seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, and there was no sign of civilization. Fear coursed through me, and I knew I had to act quickly. I pretended to agree with their crazed plans, all the while scanning for a chance to break free. Suddenly, I spotted a small, hidden side road, almost overgrown with vegetation. I seized the moment and slammed on the brakes, telling them I needed to take a quick break. As I pulled over, I shouted for them to get out of the car, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. The hitchhiker's surprise bought me a few precious moments, and I bolted out of the car, racing down the narrow side road. I could hear their shouts of rage behind me, but I didn't look back. The adrenaline pumping through my veins fueled my escape, and I ran as if my life depended on it. My desperate flight led me deeper into the forest, but the eerie, unsettling feeling of being watched never left me. I had to put as much distance between us as possible. The dense foliage and labyrinthine trees made it easy to become disoriented, and my heart pounded as I realized I was well and truly lost. For hours, I stumbled through the thick underbrush, my only source of light the waning moon above. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being hunted, that they were still out there, searching for me. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly, my terror growing with every step. Just as I thought I couldn't go on, I stumbled upon a small clearing that revealed a dirt road. Relief washed over me, and I followed it until I finally reached a remote house. I knocked on the door, my knuckles bruised and bleeding, and a kind stranger welcomed me inside, offering me sanctuary from the horrors of the road. The police were called, and I recounted my terrifying encounter with the hitchhikers, describing their malevolent intentions and the sinister path they had tried to lead me down. An investigation was launched, but the hitchhikers seemed to have vanished into thin air. My family and I embarked on a long-awaited road trip in our trusty RV. It was supposed to be a fun adventure, a chance to bond and explore the open road together. My wife, Sarah, and our two kids, Lily and Ben, were excited about the journey. Little did we know that it would take us to a place of unimaginable horrors. As we traveled along the winding highways, we noticed a strange occurrence. Our RV's radio, which had been playing our favorite tunes moments ago, crackled with static and distorted voices. I tried to adjust the dial, but the eerie signals persisted. A strange voice broke through, repeating cryptic coordinates and phrases that made my skin crawl. Curiosity piqued, I decided to follow the coordinates. My family exchanged worried glances, but they trusted my judgment, so we made our way towards the source of this mysterious signal. The coordinates led us off the main road and onto an overgrown, neglected route that seemed to have been abandoned for years. We eventually reached a place that was marked as the destination. It was an eerie, sprawling facility, hidden in the midst of a dense forest. The RV came to a halt, and we all stared in disbelief at the grim, ominous structure. The building, weathered and surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, was like something from a post-apocalyptic nightmare. I knew I had to investigate further, despite the unsettling feeling that had settled over us. My family waited in the RV, and I ventured inside the facility. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, and the dim lighting created a sense of foreboding. As I explored the facility's halls, I discovered disturbing signs of its past. Abandoned research equipment, decaying documents, and unsettling notes hinted at experiments that were conducted here. The deeper I delved, the clearer it became that this place had once been a hub of sinister activity. My heart raced as I stumbled upon a hidden chamber, and the horrors within left me paralyzed with fear. In the center of the room was an operating table, covered in restraints and sinister-looking instruments. It was surrounded by images and symbols etched into the walls that seemed to depict horrifying experiments on human subjects. I couldn't bear to look any longer, and I rushed back to the RV, where my family waited anxiously. We had to leave this place immediately, but as I turned to start the engine, a loud, metallic thud echoed through the RV. We were trapped. Looking out the window, I saw a group of men approaching, each dressed in tattered, blood-stained clothing. Their eyes were vacant, their faces contorted with a malevolent hunger. I knew we were in grave danger. In a panic, I tried to reverse the RV, but it wouldn't budge. The terrifying figures outside were closing in. With no other choice, I reached for my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. We were trapped, alone in the middle of nowhere, with no one to hear our cries for help. As the hostile group surrounded the RV, their intentions became clear. They were the victims of the gruesome experiments conducted at the facility, and they sought revenge on anyone who ventured into their territory. They had marked us as their next victims. With sheer desperation, I tried to find a way out. As the men outside began pounding on the RV, I realized our lives were hanging by a thread. I made a split-second decision to force my way through the locked gates and back onto the abandoned road. The RV screeched as I barreled through the gates, narrowly escaping our relentless pursuers. We sped away from that nightmare facility, leaving behind a trail of dust and desperation. The road trip we had looked forward to had turned into a living nightmare. We were scarred by the horrors we had witnessed and the close call that could have cost us our lives. My family and I cruised down the long, desolate stretch of highway during our summer road trip. The open road had always beckoned, promising adventure and shared experiences. We were making good time, but we needed a break, so we decided to pull over at the truck stop we spotted on the map. It seemed like a typical pit stop, a place to refuel and grab a quick meal. Little did we know that it would become a chilling ordeal. As we parked our car and stepped out, the air was heavy with the scent of gasoline, the thrum of idling engines, and the distant wailing of freight trains passing by. We made our way to the bustling truckers' diner, where grizzled men in worn-out denim jackets huddled in booths, eating in somber silence. Their eyes followed us as we entered, and the atmosphere was charged with hostility. We tried to ignore the unnerving gazes and found a booth near the back. Our server, a middle-aged woman with a forced smile, took our order. The menu offered the standard fare, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air. As we waited for our food, the truckers' conversations ebbed and flowed, never veering far from their own affairs. My son, Timmy, and daughter, Emily, were oblivious to the growing unease, chattering away about our road trip adventures. But my wife, Sarah, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were unwelcome visitors in this dimly lit enclave. The situation escalated when a group of truckers at a nearby table began whispering and casting dark glances in our direction. Their hushed conversations and occasional laughter, laced with malicious intent, sent shivers down my spine. Our food arrived, but none of us had much of an appetite. The truckers' stares became more intense, their eyes drilling into us as if we were trespassers in their secret world. The tension in the diner was palpable, and I knew we had to leave, but we had already paid for our meal, and we didn't want to draw attention to ourselves. As the minutes ticked by, the atmosphere grew increasingly hostile. The truckers were no longer content with just watching. They began making derogatory comments and crude remarks about our presence. It was as though they had marked us as interlopers who needed to be driven away. My heart pounded as one of them, a burly man with a thick beard, approached our table. His breath reeked of alcohol, and his eyes gleamed with malice. He leaned in, his face uncomfortably close to mine, and issued a thinly veiled threat. "Y'all best be hitting the road, city folk," he sneered. "This ain't no place for your kind." The menacing looks in the eyes of the other truckers told me that this was not an idle warning. We realized we were in a perilous situation, surrounded by strangers who wanted us gone. We hurriedly paid the bill and left the diner. As we stepped out into the fading light, the truckers inside continued to stare through the grimy windows. I could feel their malevolence trailing behind us, as if they were daring us to stay or return. As we walked back to our car, I couldn't help but think about the stories of travelers who had gone missing or met untimely fates at remote truck stops. We had no intention of becoming another chilling tale of the road. We piled into our car, and I quickly started the engine, ready to put as much distance between us and that menacing truck stop as possible. The headlights pierced the gathering darkness, and as we sped away, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror. I saw a group of truckers, bathed in the eerie glow of the diner's neon sign, watching our departure. Their glares lingered in my memory, a haunting reminder of the night we crossed paths with hostile truckers in the middle of nowhere. It was a road trip we would never forget, one filled with the kind of fear and paranoia that lingers long after the miles have passed. Back in the summer of 2019, my wife and I embarked on a road trip across the picturesque landscapes of England. Our journey eventually brought us to the beautiful Isle of Wight, a serene island known for its stunning coastline and lush forests. We decided to camp in the woods, seeking an escape from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. As we set up our modest campsite, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees. A warm breeze rustled the leaves, and the world around us seemed to settle into a tranquil stillness. We felt a sense of peace envelop us as we nestled in our sleeping bags, the flickering campfire providing a comforting glow. The night was serene until an eerie noise broke the silence, a distant chant echoing through the forest. My wife, Sarah, and I exchanged uneasy glances as the sound grew louder, drawing nearer to our camp. The chant was incoherent, a dissonant blend of voices. Fear clutched at my heart as I grabbed a flashlight and ventured out of our tent. Guided by the flickering light, I made my way toward the source of the noise, my wife close behind. We found ourselves standing at the edge of a clearing, hidden among the towering trees. In the center, we witnessed a sight that sent shivers down our spines. A group of people, dressed in tattered clothing, stood in a circle around a massive bonfire. They chanted in a language we couldn't comprehend, raising their hands and swaying as if entranced by the flames. In the center of the circle, a dark figure emerged. The hooded leader carried a torch, casting eerie shadows across their faces. The forest seemed to come alive with their otherworldly incantations. We were paralyzed by fear, hiding in the shadows, as we watched the ritual unfold. The cult members chanted and danced with fervor, and in the flickering firelight, we noticed strange symbols etched into their arms and foreheads. It was a chilling sight, and we couldn't comprehend what we were witnessing. As the ritual reached its climax, we couldn't bear to watch any longer. Fear overcame curiosity, and we realized we needed to leave. But as we turned to retreat, a twig snapped beneath my foot, and the cult members' heads snapped in our direction. Panic surged through us, and we sprinted back to our campsite. Our hearts pounded in our chests as we heard their footsteps close behind. There was no time to pack up our belongings. We grabbed our backpacks and ran deeper into the woods, guided only by our flashlight's trembling beam. The cult members pursued us, their eerie chants echoing through the trees, growing louder and more menacing. We zigzagged through the forest, trying to lose them, but their determination was unrelenting. Fear propelled us forward, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. As the night wore on, We finally managed to put some distance between us and the cult, but we dared not stop. Our flashlights grew dim, and exhaustion weighed us down. We had no choice but to keep moving, hoping that the trees would shield us from the sinister group that pursued us. Hours passed, and the sky began to lighten as dawn approached. The eerie chanting faded into the distance, and we finally allowed ourselves to rest beneath the sheltering canopy. We huddled together, listening to the birdsong and the rustling leaves, the forest reclaiming its peaceful serenity. We had witnessed something terrifying that night, an unspeakable ritual in the depths of the Isle of Wight's woods. The open road stretched before us, promising unforgettable experiences and memories. We had a route planned, complete with scheduled stops and points of interest. However, it was one unexpected stop that would turn our journey into a living nightmare. It was a remote rest area in the heart of a vast wilderness. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows among the trees. We pulled into the rest area, the only car there, and parked in a secluded corner. Stretching our legs and breathing in the crisp, pine-scented air, we marveled at the untouched beauty of the surroundings. We spent a peaceful hour enjoying our picnic and the natural serenity that enveloped us. My wife, Sarah, snapped photos of our kids, Timmy and Emily, as they explored the area. But little did we know that the tranquility of the wilderness concealed an impending horror. As the daylight waned, we decided it was time to head back to the car and continue our journey. But as we approached the spot where we had parked, confusion washed over us. Our car was gone. Panic set in, followed by disbelief. We couldn't have been in the wrong spot. We had been so careful. My heart pounded as I scanned the area, hoping we had just missed it. But the car was nowhere to be seen. In its place were only tire tracks leading away from our vanished vehicle. It was as if the earth had swallowed our means of escape. The eerie silence of the wilderness now felt oppressive, and I noticed the encroaching darkness with a sense of dread. It was no longer just a serene forest, it was an isolated, menacing expanse of trees and shadows. With a sinking feeling in my stomach, I took out my phone to call for help. But there was no signal, no bars to connect us to the outside world. Panic began to gnaw at the edges of our sanity. We were stranded, helpless, with night rapidly descending upon us. As a father, my first instinct was to protect my family. We huddled together and tried to keep our fear at bay, discussing our options. Should we try to find the nearest town? Should we wait by the rest area, hoping someone would pass by and help us? The absence of cell signal ruled out calling for assistance. Timmy and Emily were frightened, and Sarah's face reflected the same fear I felt. The forest had transformed into an ominous maze of shadows, and the chirping crickets and hooting owls sounded like taunts in the wilderness. We decided to stay put, hoping that someone would eventually come looking for their own car, find ours, and help us. With no other choice, we gathered our belongings and sat in our makeshift campsite, staring into the dense forest. The night was a symphony of unknown sounds. Each rustle of leaves, every twig snapping, sent shivers down our spines. Our imaginations ran wild, conjuring predators and dangers lurking just beyond the pale glow of our flashlights. We huddled together, seeking comfort and solace in each other's presence. The inky blackness of the wilderness pressed against the beam of our flashlight, creating a claustrophobic circle of light. Our hearts raced as the night seemed endless, and our cries for help went unanswered. As the hours passed, the temperature dropped, and we bundled up, clutching our children tightly. I scanned the surroundings for any sign of our car or other people, but found only the relentless wilderness. We were alone, and it was a terrifying isolation. Doubt began to seep into our minds. Had the car really disappeared, or had we simply become disoriented? Could it be hidden behind the trees, just out of sight? We decided to search again, despite our fear. With flashlights in hand, we ventured into the darkness, calling out for our lost vehicle. We moved carefully, each step fraught with unease, uncertain of what we might encounter in the wilderness. Our cries for help echoed through the forest, seemingly absorbed by the trees. But after an exhaustive search, we had to admit the unthinkable. Our car was gone, as if it had been swallowed by the wilderness itself. We returned to our campsite defeated, hearts heavy with the realization that we were stranded, abandoned by the outside world. The night felt interminable. We shivered, not only from the cold but also from the lurking dread that surrounded us. Every rustle, every shadow, was a potential threat. We took turns keeping watch, trying to stay vigilant in our vulnerable situation. Dawn finally broke, but the light offered little comfort. We needed to find help, civilization, anything that would save us from the wilderness that had become our prison. We knew the odds were slim, but we couldn't give up. With backpacks filled with essentials, we set off on foot, following the tire tracks that had led away our car. Our children clung to us, their eyes reflecting our shared fear. The forest seemed even more ominous in the daylight, with gnarled trees and looming shadows. We trudged through the wilderness for hours, shouting for help, hoping for a sign of civilization. As the day wore on, our despair deepened. We were miles from the rest area, with no end in sight. The hours stretched into days as we battled hunger, fatigue, and the relentless wilderness. We made rudimentary shelters, scavenging for food, and relied on our instincts to survive. There was no turning back, no sign of rescue. In our darkest moments, I questioned our decision to take that ill-fated stop at the remote rest area. What sinister force had taken our car and left us stranded in the unforgiving wilderness? Eventually, we reached a small cabin with a radio and called for help. We were saved, but we'll never forget what we went through. I cruised down the open highway on my trusty motorcycle. The wind roared in my ears, and the open road stretched before me, promising a journey filled with adventure and discovery. I was a solitary biker on a solo road trip, embracing the freedom of the open road. As I rode through a desolate stretch of highway, I noticed a sign advertising a rest stop ahead. I figured it was a good time for a break and a chance to refuel. But little did I know that this decision would lead to a nightmare beyond my wildest fears. I pulled into the rest stop, its weathered sign creaking in the wind. The place looked rundown and deserted, a far cry from the cheerful, bustling rest stops I'd encountered on previous trips. Still, I parked my bike and headed inside the small, dimly lit building. The interior was eerily quiet, and the sole cashier behind the counter barely looked up as I entered. I grabbed a bottle of water from the shelves and approached the counter to pay. The cashier's eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw a sinister glint. It sent a shiver down my spine, but I dismissed it as paranoia. As I exited the store and made my way back to my bike, I sensed something was off. The atmosphere in the rest stop was heavy with foreboding, and the cashier's unsettling gaze lingered in my mind. I had a sinking feeling that I should leave this place behind. But before I could mount my bike and make a hasty exit, I was suddenly struck from behind. The world went black, and I knew no more. When I awoke, my surroundings had changed dramatically. I found myself in a dimly lit, underground facility. My hands were bound, and my head throbbed with pain. I struggled to make sense of my surroundings, panic coursing through my veins. I was not alone. Several other captives were in the room with me, all bound and disoriented. A sense of dread hung heavy in the air, and whispers of fear passed among us. We had all fallen victim to the sinister forces that lurked in the abandoned rest stop. Our captors were ruthless, masked individuals who moved with military precision. They forced us into a cramped cell, locking the door behind us. Our world had shrunk to the dimensions of that cold, dark room. Hours turned into days, and our captors showed no mercy. They subjected us to physical and psychological torment, demanding information we did not possess. With each passing moment, our will to survive grew stronger, and the seeds of resistance were sown among us. We devised a plan to outsmart our captors, using our combined strength and resourcefulness to overcome them. In whispers and secret meetings, we coordinated our escape. One fateful night, as our captors made their rounds, we made our move. We overpowered the guards, using makeshift weapons crafted from items we had managed to collect in our confinement. In the dim, flickering light, the room became a battleground, and desperation fueled our determination. Our captors were not prepared for the uprising, and we managed to incapacitate them, one by one. The taste of freedom was within our reach, and we raced through the underground facility, looking for a way out. As we ascended to ground level, our relief was short-lived. The abandoned rest stop had transformed into a nightmarish fortress, with guards and surveillance cameras at every corner. The odds were stacked against us, but we were determined to escape. We used our knowledge of the facility and our captors' routines to navigate through the maze of danger. We moved stealthily, avoiding confrontation whenever possible, while fighting back when necessary. Our journey was fraught with danger and the constant threat of recapture. We watched our fellow captives fall one by one, victims of the relentless pursuit by our captors. But we refused to give up. In our darkest hour, we reached the surface, bursting into the open air. The moonlit night welcomed our escape, and we ran, our freedom tantalizingly close. We fled into the wilderness, leaving behind the underground facility and the horrors it contained. Our journey to safety was far from over. We had to elude our pursuers, who were determined to recapture us. It became a race against time and an ultimate test of survival. We fought, we ran, and we held on to our humanity in the face of inhumanity. The road to freedom was a treacherous one, but it was a path we had no choice but to follow. Months later, I find myself sharing this harrowing tale, hoping that others will be vigilant when stopping at remote rest stops along the open road. The world is not always what it seems, and darkness can lurk in the most unexpected places. I may have escaped the underground facility, but the memories of that nightmare continue to haunt my dreams. As we drove through the remote, desolate stretches of road, I noticed a car tailgating us. I thought nothing of it at first, chalking it up to an impatient driver eager to pass. However, my unease grew as the car continued to tailgate us relentlessly, its driver seemingly fixated on us. My sister and I exchanged worried glances, unable to shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. We tried to speed up, slow down, and even change lanes, but our pursuer matched our every move. Panic began to set in as we realized this was no ordinary road rage incident. The driver of the menacing car had a sinister intent, and their relentless pursuit made it clear that we were not random victims, but the specific target of their wrath. We had no idea why, but there was no doubt that our lives were in danger. As darkness fell, our fears intensified. The isolated road offered no respite, and our options were dwindling. Desperation clawed at us as we contemplated our next move. We decided to veer off the highway, hoping to lose our pursuer in the labyrinthine roads of the forest. But our pursuer was not so easily deterred. They followed us into the forest, their car a malevolent shadow in our rearview mirror. The dense trees closed in around us, adding to the feeling of entrapment. As minutes turned into hours, the situation became increasingly dire. Our pursuer showed no signs of relenting. We could barely see the road ahead, and the forest whispered with an eerie stillness. We were in the heart of a nightmare, with no escape in sight. Fear gnawed at us, and we began to question our actions, our choices, and the mysterious motive behind our pursuer's relentless rage. The isolation of the forest amplified our dread, and it felt as if we were being watched by unseen eyes. With our fuel running low and our nerves stretched to their breaking point, we knew we had to make a stand. We could not let this vengeful driver dictate the outcome of our road trip. It was time to confront the pursuer head-on. We braced ourselves as we slowed down, allowing our pursuer to catch up. Their car pulled alongside ours, and I glanced at the driver, a face contorted by rage and hatred. There was no reasoning with this person, and we had to rely on our wits to survive. In a desperate bid for freedom, we swerved into the oncoming lane, causing a head-on collision with our tormentor's car. The impact was jarring, and for a moment, chaos reigned. It was a last-ditch effort to escape, a gamble for our lives. The collision left both cars severely damaged, and in a haze of smoke and shattered glass, we seized the opportunity to flee. We raced away from the wreckage, leaving our pursuer behind, their car incapacitated. We drove for hours, putting as much distance between us and the nightmarish encounter as possible. The forest gave way to open road, and the horrors of that night gradually faded. The dread that had weighed on our hearts began to lift. As we arrived at our destination, we realized we had narrowly escaped a terrifying ordeal. The memory of the relentless pursuer haunted our thoughts, and we couldn't shake the fear that we might encounter them again. But for now, we were safe, our road trip taking an unexpected detour through a nightmarish confrontation. My two buddies and I were on a road trip, seeking adventure and a break from the monotony of daily life. The open road had always beckoned to us, promising the allure of new experiences and uncharted territories. Little did we know that our journey would take a chilling turn, one that would lead us down a desolate stretch of road and into a nightmarish encounter with sinister workers. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon as we approached a highway that seemed to go on forever. It was a road less traveled, and the vast expanse of unfinished construction stretched before us, an eerie reminder of the road's isolation. We figured it was a shortcut to our next destination, a chance to save time and maybe even enjoy some untouched scenery. As we ventured further down the road, unease settled in. The construction signs were faded, and the path was in disrepair. But what truly alarmed us was the sight of several workers in the distance. They moved with a purpose, yet something about their presence sent shivers down our spines. Ignoring our unease, we continued on, hoping to pass the construction site without incident. However, the workers began to gather along the road, forming an ominous barrier. It was clear that they had other intentions. We slowed down, attempting to navigate through the workers, who were dressed in tattered overalls, their faces obscured by dirt and grime. They looked more like shadows than people, their eyes hidden beneath the brims of their worn-out hats. As we tried to pass, the workers began to surround our car, and their demeanor grew increasingly hostile. It was as if they resented our intrusion into their domain. They pounded on our vehicle, leaving dents in the metal and cracking the windshield. Panic surged through us as we realized that this was not a simple roadblock. Desperation set in as we tried to reverse and escape, but the workers' vehicles blocked our path, and they seemed intent on preventing us from leaving the construction site. The situation grew more sinister as they began to shout and bang on our windows. Fear drove us to act. We plowed through the barricade, forcing our way past the hostile workers, leaving a trail of dust and chaos in our wake. It was a terrifying escape, and we could hear the revving of their engines as they gave chase. As the miles flew by, our pursuers remained relentless, refusing to let us go. It was a high-speed chase through the desolate construction zone, with our lives hanging in the balance. The unfinished road seemed like a never-ending nightmare, the construction equipment looming like grim sentinels. We managed to outmaneuver our pursuers, racing away from the construction site and back onto more familiar terrain. The sinister workers gradually disappeared into the distance, their figures fading like ghosts in the rearview mirror. As we finally reached a place of safety, we couldn't shake the fear and unease that clung to us. The encounter with those sinister workers had been a chilling ordeal, one that had shaken our belief in the open road and the adventures it promised. Our road trip had transformed into a nightmarish journey, a chilling encounter with the unknown. We may never know the true intentions of those workers, but their malevolence and relentless pursuit were etched in our memories forever, serving as a grim reminder that sometimes the road less traveled leads to a destination of terror. A few years ago, my 2 daughters and I embarked on a road trip, an adventure meant to create lasting memories and strengthen the bonds of our family. Little did we know that our journey would take a terrifying turn, thrusting us into a nightmare encounter with a man that would haunt us for years to come. Our road trip had been filled with joy and laughter, the open road stretching before us like a canvas of endless possibilities. We stopped at quaint motels, enjoyed roadside picnics, and marveled at the beauty of the countryside. However, one fateful evening, as the sun began to set, we found ourselves on a remote stretch of road, miles away from civilization. The countryside around us was picturesque, and the tranquility of our surroundings lulled us into a sense of security. My daughters, aged 10 and 12 at the time, played in the back seat, their giggles filling the car. We had the windows rolled down to let in the warm summer breeze, and all seemed right with the world. That's when I saw him. A lone figure, standing by the side of the road, appeared out of nowhere. I assumed he might need assistance, and being a responsible father, I pulled over, my instincts to help kicking in. He was a middle-aged man, disheveled and emaciated, his clothes ragged and his eyes filled with a strange intensity. As I rolled down the window, he leaned in, and I was immediately hit by a foul stench, a nauseating mix of body odor and decay. His speech was rapid and incoherent, as if he were speaking in tongues. The atmosphere inside the car turned from idyllic to tense in an instant. My daughters had stopped playing and were now huddled together, their faces etched with fear. My heart raced as I tried to understand the man's words, but they made no sense, a disjointed rambling that sent shivers down my spine. I decided it was best to offer him some food and water from our supplies, hoping it would calm him down and end this unnerving encounter. As I reached into the back seat for a bottle of water, I could feel his eyes on me, filled with an unsettling hunger that went beyond mere thirst. The man abruptly snatched the water bottle from my hand, uncapped it, and began to pour it over his head and face, his mouth agape, gulping it down. His actions were erratic, and I realized that this was no ordinary traveler in need. My instinct screamed at me to drive away, to protect my daughters from this menacing stranger. I quickly pulled the car back onto the road, leaving the man behind, but he didn't give up easily. He chased after us, his voice growing more desperate, his cries punctuated by a maniacal laughter that chilled my bones. Fear raced through me as I accelerated, desperate to distance ourselves from this disturbing figure. But he was relentless, and for miles, he pursued us with an almost supernatural determination. Panic consumed us, and my daughters clung to each other in the back seat, their terror mirroring my own. It was then that we encountered another car coming from the opposite direction. I swerved and flagged them down, desperate for help. The driver of the other car immediately understood the urgency of our situation. Without hesitation, he blocked the road, preventing the man from reaching us. As the 2 cars came to a stop, the man approached the other driver, his frenzied state undeterred. But the stranger in the other car, who happened to be an off-duty police officer, acted swiftly and apprehended him, ensuring that he couldn't harm us any further. The relief that washed over us was palpable, and tears welled in my eyes as I thanked the officer for coming to our aid. The mysterious man was detained, and we were finally free from the nightmare that had threatened to consume us. The encounter left us shaken, our idyllic road trip transformed into a harrowing ordeal. We later learned that the man had a history of mental illness, and his disturbing actions were the result of his troubled mind. But that knowledge did little to ease the fear that had settled in our hearts.